Compliments of the season and welcome to the Gavel. I'm Linda Akibi. The National Assembly is on recess for the Christmas and New Year holidays and will resume on January 28, 2020. On this edition of the Gavel, we'll do an introspective look on the National Assembly in 2019. The year 2019 saw the beginning of the 9th Assembly. Now, for analysts, 2019 was a mixed bag of highs and lows for the National Assembly. While some commend Parliament for its prompt passage of the 2020 budget, others argue that the National Assembly in 2019 did not play its constitutional role of checking the executive. Senators Ahmed Lawan and Ovie Omo-Agege were elected as Senate and Deputy Senate President, while Mr. Femi Gbajabiamila was elected as Speaker and Idris Wase emerged Deputy Speaker unopposed.
So ahead me God.
One of the early concerns raised by keen observers of Parliament was the likelihood of the 9th Assembly not asserting its independence and acting as a rubber stamp to the executive. Critics based this concern on how the major principal officers of the National Assembly emerged, particularly as it appeared that they were personally handpicked by the party and by extension the presidency. The comments made by the Senate President also amplify this concern.
I want to assure you that any request that comes from Mr. President is a request that will make Nigeria a better place, either in terms of appointments or legislation. And the Senate will act expeditiously to ensure that we play our part in the confirmation or passing of the legislation appropriately and accordingly.
The legislature's role is oversight, overseeing the executive. It's also legislation, making laws, and then representation. Their job is to scrutinize the executive to make sure that they're not on their own and doing what they want and however they want to do it. Unfortunately, that's what this 9th Assembly has defined itself to be. And then the legislature is not supposed to be like an extension of the executive. They are not supposed to be like the government in itself. It's supposed to be like we, the people, having eyes and ears inside the system, and so they're looking at what's our interest. I don't see how they've been defending our interests. I don't see how what's important to us is important to them. It's just what's important to them, and so they've just gotten it completely wrong if we're going to be assessing the last 6 months of their being in office.
But federal lawmakers dismissed the allegations that the 9th Assembly will be a rubber stamp to the executive.
We're just starting. We just hope that there will be an improvement, but for now it's just watching, because if you look at the judiciary, look at the legislative section, it's not the executive seems to be rascal in nature for now. But I think they will be corrected through laws made by the legislature.
That was Mr. President of the Senate's personal view. I'm not sure he was speaking, for the entire National Assembly members, because if whatever president brings is good, I don't think he has reason to even bring it in the first instance. I don't think we'll be elected by our various constituencies to come here and debate on issues raised by both the president, which is executive, or from any other arm of government. So I think maybe that was, I would say that he was misquoted because he cannot represent or speak for the entire members of the Senate and House of Representatives.
It gets to a point that we must change the style how we do things, and this is what the Ninth Senate is doing. All this time we've been having war between executive and legislature. It has really yielded nothing. So at a point, you must create some atmosphere of peace. That's why I said the Ninth Senate is a Senate of peace. For the sake of the ordinary people. Because whenever there's a fight between the executive and legislature, the people that suffer are the ordinary people on the street. So it's not a rubber stamp. No, it's not a rubber stamp. But it's like relaxing certain procedural approaches that tend to create a lot of bottlenecks. Take, for instance, the speedy passage of the budget. If I had gone by the convention, it wouldn't have been up by now.
Personally, I don't see why the National Assembly will not be independent of the executive. I think what people should realize is this. The present leadership of the National Assembly, there's none of them that is not seeing any presidential election as of today. In essence, there's no reason for any of them, any of the principal officer, to start thinking of getting favor by way of compromising. No, I don't think so. So I expect and I look forward to a robust argument, a robust presentation on the floor of the Senate. I look forward to a robust relationship with the executive, because whether you talk about the executive or the legislature, we all have one thing in common: for the good of the nation.
In terms of legislations proposed in the last 6 months by the Ninth Assembly, none was as controversial and placed Parliament on a collision course with the public as much as a social media bill and the bill to establish a commission on hate speech. The commentary in the public sphere was brutal as Nigerians exclaimed that these bills are intended to stifle free speech.
They're looking for a way to control that media, to be able to monitor what is being said, how it's being said, and who it reaches. And if the legislator is asking for 37 billion, this legislature is asking for 37 billion to renovate their, their house, as I would like to call it, the National Assembly. That means they're not taking into cognizance the pulse of the people. This is not the time. This is not the greatest need. They're afraid of being erased by a younger, vibrant generation that have access to these digital devices that people listen to. So they're looking for a way to control that media, to be able to monitor what is being said, how it's being said, and who it reaches. So that's why this bill is inherently bad and ill-timed.
We don't even need it at all, because what are you really talking about? People are interested in good governance, not about those unnecessary laws. What do you mean by hate speech? That is not the problem of this country, and the poor man's needs are very few. They talk about health, they talk about transport, and they talk about education. So why are you talking about it? I have a right to express myself. And of course, if you don't agree, and there are relevant laws to take care of any other thing, I think it's unnecessary and untimely.
No, that is a total distraction from the realities of the moment. Nigerians are hungry. Nigerians are hungry. Most of them have not eaten. Most of them need food. Most Nigerians need education. They need to fix the infrastructure. We need to make laws that will touch on the lives of the ordinary Nigerian. So at this moment, I think it's a distraction. I'm talking about hate speech and all that.
I think the intention of this bill is to let people know that we should reduce the kind of words we use and hate speeches and all that. But again, it's very difficult to really state what is a hate speech. Now, if you have done something wrong and I say it out, that's not a hate speech. I'm simply just confirming who you are and what you have done. So the hate speech really have to be redefined, what we mean by hate speech. I don't know whether the hate speech could amount to lies or fabrication that does not reflect any practical reality to damage the image of a person. And we have such provisions in the Constitution. When somebody lowers your image, assault and things like that. So it's a bit confusing.
I think that what we should do is to look at how the various stakeholders in the media can come together and look at how they can deal with the quacks, those who use the social media to pull down institutions and to debase individuals in the society. There are quite a number of people, they are not journalists, they are not trained, okay? So they use the media to cause a lot of disaffection in the society.
The Ninth Assembly scored a huge win by passing the national budget in December 2019, returning the country to a one-year budget cycle, an accomplishment not achieved by previous parliaments in recent times. Going into 2020, Nigerians would want to see a National Assembly step up to its constitutional role of checking the executive, efficiently oversighting government MDAs, and passing critical legislations to pull Nigeria out of the unenviable ranking of the country with the largest number of extreme poor people in the world. We're still evaluating the legislature in the year 2019. Now, this time, we sat down with the public analyst, Mr. Sesu Akume, to tell us the defining moments of the National Assembly in 2019.
I would say the 9th National Assembly is one of the worst things that has happened to Nigeria in the last 20 years. We've had a National Assembly that has completely lost its focus, especially when we understand and take cue from the chairman of the National Assembly, the head of the National Assembly, that's the Senate President. The deputy is a speaker. You understand that this National Assembly is completely misdirected because they've totally lost focus. The Senate President, after being inaugurated as Senate President, he went for a visit back home to do a thank you visit. And right there, back home in Yobe, he told his constituents that he was not going to fail Buhari. Those were his words. In essence, his allegiance was to an individual, not to the people, to his constituents and Nigeria as a whole. That's not the job of the National Assembly. That's not the job of the legislature. The legislature's role is oversight, overseeing the executive. It's also legislation, making laws, and then representation. Their job is to scrutinize the executive to make sure that they're not on their own and doing what they want and however they want to do it. Unfortunately, that's what this 9th Assembly has defined itself to be. On the 12th of June this year, when Nigeria marked our first Democracy Day, June 12th, to mark June 12th, Senator I.D. Gang from Plateau raised a motion. He wanted to have a debate on the President's Democracy Day speech, which is the job of the legislature, to analyze what the President said, to draw out nuggets from it, and to know how they can cue in. The Senate President said no, they were not going to have that discussion, which means that the legislature was not going to do its job of oversight, or not even of looking into what the President said. That was the second one, and so many other examples. Weeks ago, a presidential advisor was there to see him, and he said anything the President brings is fine. Everything, they're just going to rubber stamp it because anything that comes from the President is right. That's not the job of the legislature. When you put together all those things together, you see that this is like one of the worst legislatures we've had ever. Because I've gone back to history beyond 1999, back to the first legislature we had in 1951. We've never had any legislature seeing itself as an extension of the executive. It has never been, and that's it. And then the legislature is not supposed to be like an extension of the executive. They are not supposed to be like the government in itself. It's supposed to be like we, the people, having eyes and ears inside the system, and so they're looking at what's our interest. I don't see how they've been defending our interests. I don't see how what's important to us is important to them. It's just what's important to them, and so they've just gotten it completely wrong if you're going to be assessing the last 6 months of their being in office.
Now when you talk about, this 9th Assembly putting itself to be in absolute, as part of the executive, in 100 support of the executive, some would say that would this not make governance easier in terms of if the executive and the National Assembly are on the same page, we may see, legislations passed quicker, like we saw with the 2020 budget, and we may see critical legislations which have not been passed, like a PIB. When both arms are working in unity, we may see this being passed. Is there something good coming out of this?
There's always something good when there's unity of purpose, when there's mutual understanding, when there's teamwork, and all of those. When you focus on one thing. Unfortunately, there's an extent to which when you take it, it now becomes subservience, which is what we're seeing now. It becomes a place where you now become a rubber stamp. It becomes a place where you become like your lackeys of the executive.
You're welcome back to the Gavel. We continue with the interview with public analyst Sesu Akume on the National Assembly in 2019. Two critical legislations were introduced this year by the 9th Assembly, which, took a lot of focus and got a lot of people talking. And that's the social media bill and the hate speech commission bill. do you think the timing of these bills coming up was appropriate? You understand? What are your thoughts also about these two bills?
Yes. My thoughts on those two bills, like you said, those are the top most talked about bills of 2019, of the first 6 months of the 9th National Assembly. And it simply goes to underscore the point we've been making earlier. Their focus is completely off tangent. They've just lost focus completely. Nigeria is leading in maternal mortality. Nigeria is one of the top countries in maternal mortality, in infant mortality. We're number 2 in open defecation, where there's so many things. We have 100 million of us are living on less than 700 naira a day. These are not critical issues to them. What is important to them is how to stifle the public from airing what their opinion is on issues, and then you're telling me that you're going to be regulating how we deploy social media, and that's not the core. That's not what you should be focusing on. So when you now take cue from you to see that, okay, the president, when he was a military head of state, had Decree 2 and Decree 4 that stifled people communicating and saying what was on their mind. As a matter of fact, the laws at the time said, what you say can be true, but if it embarrasses a public official, you are liable. It can be true, but be mindful of the truth you say. Those are the kind of laws that they are reenacting in 2019 just to please a president. And so their job is not to please the president. Their job is to represent us. So we're saying that in the critical areas that should have affected the lives of Nigerians and improved our lives and all of those, I'm not seeing those. Rather, I'm seeing you, because you are mismanaging the system, mismanaging the economy, mismanaging opportunities, and so we're saying, no, this is not right. Things ought to be done this way. This wasn't done right. You're telling me that, okay, you can label that hate speech and then get me hanged for committing hate speech. How does that add up? This is not what we should be focusing on, quite frankly. Did you even notice what agitates my mind, that for which I speak, and then you want to shut down the social media, for instance, or what you're going to be labeling hate speech? Because the draft of the law, it doesn't even explain what hate speech is, which means you can now label whatever I say as hate speech and then connect it with something and then find me killed. The essence is simply to stifle people and to make us feel like we're conquered people, which is very, very wrong of them. That shouldn't be what we should be talking about. In 2015, Nigeria signed, the president then signed the Administration of Criminal Justice Act, for instance. I'm giving examples. It's because of this law that right now you have people who were before now were untouchables. Well, they're untouchables. They're now in prison. We have former governors who are now in prison. It's simply because of that law. So there are laws that are that effectual. The laws that right now you don't detain anybody for more than 48 hours. They have to be in court for so and so. We have the Freedom of Information Act 2011, which allows me to make inquiries to any public institution to let me have access to public information, which promotes accountability, which promotes open governance. These are effectual laws. We have the Child's Right Law 2015, which and many such laws. The Violence Against Persons Prevention Act 2015. There's so many of such laws that have worked to improve our society. Even if our society is not improving as it is, we still have laws that make it happen. Now, who is the hate speech bill helping, or the social media bill to shut down social media? They had attempted that in 2015. We said, no, this cannot happen. And it's a top priority in 2019. How does that add up?
Now, the sponsor of the bill, the Senator Sabi Abdullahi, he says that this bill, the hate speech bill, is, would help, would be a remedy to religious and ethnic persecution in Nigeria, as and this is coming from what the U.S. government has said, putting Nigeria as a special watch list, of countries with this kind of issue of persecution, religious and ethnic persecutions. Do you think this bill would help in this direction?
I think there should be first things first. I'll take your mind back to what happened in Zaria 4 years or so ago, when Nigerian citizens were killed and buried and in shallow graves and hidden, and that was it. Nothing happened to anybody. They are a religious minority. whatever their religious inclinations are or whatever it is they believe, they are Nigerians. Nobody faced any consequences for that. If the senator is honest about protecting, if it is about protecting minority rights of minorities, of religious minorities, then can we address that? Can we find people find consequences for that which they did? He doesn't have any track record, I know, of him addressing the rights of people who are minorities and all of those. That's not what the law is even talking about. It's targeting. That's not even what it's targeting. And you're talking about ethnic. I'm not seeing his advocacy on such things, on such matters, for me to know, or for anybody to convince anybody that he felt strongly about this, and so this is actually what he's doing. That's not what the law is about. That law is targeting a different thing altogether. And then it's also talking about establishing yet another commission. Did he say where we're going to be getting funds to fund the commission? Because right now we're borrowing to run the system. Are we going to be borrowing more money to fund his commission he's talking about? So the law is just a very bad idea. It's just a very bad idea, and that's not what we should be focusing on at this time at all.
So what sort of legislations would you want to see from the 9th Assembly going into 2020 and even in the next 3 years?
First and foremost, this National Assembly should stop being a rubber stamp. First and foremost, that's where it starts. It starts there before the legislations. The legislations they should come up with. Right now, they're just an extension of Aso Rock, which is a complete no-no. They should stand as an autonomous and independent arm of government to overlook what the executive is doing. Right now, they're not doing that. Second, they have to rearrange their priorities. The National Assembly is inbred. It's designed to take care of itself. That's why we are the country, the largest number of poor people, the largest percentage of poor people, and yet we have a National Assembly that's the highest paid in the world. How do you reconcile that? How do you reconcile that a poor country like Nigeria, has legislators that are more highly paid than the richest country in the world? How does that add up? How does it add up that the first order of business was to allot 5.5 billion naira to buy vehicles for themselves? They're not talking about public transportation. They're not thinking about how we move. So you're simply there to take care of yourself. The system is inbred. Right now, they're talking about another 37 billion naira to renovate their own complex. It's not as if the roofs are falling. It's not as if they don't have chairs to sit on. It's not as if that's not even the issue. That same National Assembly was renovated in 2013. 40 billion naira was released to build 2 extra wings and to renovate it. That was just 2013. So you're telling me that in 6 years, we need to renovate again for 37 billion naira? How does that add up? And then they also have very wrong practices they've been carrying out that nobody knows where they learned it from. There's another fraud they call the zonal intervention projects. Every year, 100 billion naira is allotted for those zonal intervention projects. So they now split it. Everybody gets 200 million naira to nominate projects to be done. So somebody says we're going to do cultural orientation for junior secondary school students in my constituency, and then they allot 50 million naira. Another 50 million naira for cultural orientation for senior secondary school. What does cultural orientation mean? So that's how the 100 billion naira is split. Everybody gets 200 million naira, and that's how it's shared. That's why the president said the other day that for the past 10 years, they've collected 1 trillion naira in zonal intervention funds with nothing to show for it. The thing, however, is the same president has given them the 100 billion naira for the 5th time this year. So what's the point? They now do frivolous projects like giving people grinding machines, doing that. What does that add up to? They need to refocus their minds and think critically on, stop thinking about themselves, but think about Nigeria. And think about Nigerians, and think about improving our lives and improving the system as it is. Right now, anything the executive says goes.
In terms of specific legislations, what would you want to see?
So there's so many areas I in particular am passionate about. There's so many areas I'm passionate about. And we have so many laws in the first place that are not properly done. Let me give you one example. There's the UBE Act of 2004. The Constitution, for instance, says that primary education or basic education is the fault of the local government. The law goes ahead to say that, in fact, gives specific responsibilities to the local government. It says every child is entitled to compulsory free universal basic education. And it is stakeholders at the local government who are to enforce the law. They say any parent or guardian who doesn't have their child in school is liable and has committed an offense already. It's the local government who should do this. It now goes ahead and says anybody who implements a universal basic education qualifies for a federal grant. The states do not access the funds. The local governments that are eligible cannot access the funds either, because they can't access directly. The law doesn't allow them to access directly except the states. And so you now have UBEC every year telling us that they have so and so and so tens of billions of naira nobody's claiming. So we have 13.2 million children out of school. And then we have funds to be accessed and nobody's accessing them because the states won't access them. The local governments that should access them cannot access them because the law does not include them to access it. That's an amendment that can be made for local governments to be able, that are eligible, because they're eligible, you can directly contribute your quota and get the money and run your system.
Now this is where we call it a day on this week's edition of The Gavel. If you have any views on any of the issues discussed, please email us on thegavel@channelstv.com. Now this is wishing you a happy new year in advance and hope to see you in 2020.